All right, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Travis Markham. I'm Director of Education for Austin Classical Guitar and one of the lead authors for guitarcurriculum.com.
I'm Jeremy Osborne, Assistant Director of Outreach and Education for Austin Classical Guitar and one of the co-authors of guitarcurriculum.com.
And I'm Phil Swayze. I'm Director of Guitar at Better Check Middle School. I've been teaching there in Austin, South Austin for 8 years.
Thank you for being here, Phil. We've known Phil for a number of years now, and he's a repeat contributor to these webinars. We really appreciate him spreading the knowledge and helping others learn from his experience. So today we're here to talk about classroom management, which actually encompasses just so much of basic music education and really everything we do in the classroom. But I think it's probably the issue that we work with teachers the most, at least here in Austin. Classroom management is something that we're constantly, every day, working with teachers to help improve their relationships with the students, not only through like behavior management and changing, negative or unwanted behaviors in the classroom into positive ones, but also to increase motivation and help our students become passionate musicians, which is why we're all in this job in the first place. So a little bit about my background with this topic. I've been teaching in the classroom now for 16 years. Middle school, high school, and university. I have an undergraduate degree in music education and was certified as an orchestra director, and as a classical guitarist. I kind of brought that knowledge to Austin Classical Guitar and started writing curriculum and starting guitar programs. After that, I went on into graduate school, did a PhD in music education, and I was an assistant instructor for a course on classroom management for arts education. It's really a passion of mine. I love thinking about teachers' relationships with their students and how to get that kid who maybe, won't speak up and won't engage and won't play, to get them, comfortable and confident playing, or the opposite, someone who, a young student who might not be able to focus themselves enough to really progress, helping them to stop and be patient and focus. These are things that fascinate me, and how we do it in the classroom takes a tremendous amount of thought. And so I love thinking about that. Jeremy, you want to give us a little bit?
So for me, it's a little different from Travis, but I'm sure some of the people that are watching this can relate to where I'm coming at. I have both a bachelor's and master's degree in classical guitar performance, and kind of fell into a great opportunity at the right time to be able to do this kind of work in the classroom, the ground level with ACG when we started. I've kind of had to learn a lot of these things by experience, and I've been doing this for like almost over 10 years now, and I do a lot of mentor teaching around the city of Austin, and I find all the time that even though I'm coming in as a guitar expert, that the majority of the time I'm not really talking about anything with having to do with the guitar when I work with some of these teachers, especially the younger teachers, especially the teachers that come to this from like an alternative certification standpoint. We talk a lot about these types of things, classroom management, and I think a big part of it too is the whole idea of like boosting intrinsic motivation and how that actually is management in of itself. So I've worked a long time in the juvenile justice system, running a guitar program in there, and I've learned a lot about that. The real holy grail of classroom management isn't necessarily, okay, what do I do when a kid does this? Okay, what are the best practices when a kid gets in your face or is just not gonna engage in the class? That's all hearsay, and I don't think that's the most productive conversation that we could have about this, because really it's all experience once you get in there. But You know, the real way to manage a class is to find a way that your students trust and are also buy into your, yeah. So that's me. And I guess Phil, if you tell us a little bit about yourself and some of your
Sure. Yeah. I came into the classroom through an alternative certification program, and just kind of on a whim, basically started a program from scratch at Check Middle School. And I guess a lot of my experience, especially early on, was Jeremy as my mentor teacher, kind of helping me at least get started with that, with those ideas of managing a classroom. But there's just it's such a big issue. High level instruction can't happen if your classroom isn't well managed. But when high level instruction is happening, it kind of manages your classroom for you. So it's a tricky cycle. I know the things that I remember as a young teacher and as a new teacher, it's just the amount of information that's coming at you at any single moment during a class time is overwhelming, and you just add up those issues into your head, and the management issues always seem so daunting. And it helped me to have somebody that would come in and watch, and Jeremy would just say, "Hey, Phil, relax. Like, you're a little frantic, your kids are picking up on your energy," or, stay with that student until they complete a goal. And just, it really helped me, I guess, early on managing a room to kind of have another set of eyes, and another kind of perspective. Um, and that was probably my biggest advantage early on. And then, as you settle in, you start to see less and less issues, and you start to see things more clearly because there's less information coming at you that you don't want to be coming at you, to kind of filter out the noise and focus in on the main goal. I've bought into the kind of ACGS philosophy of engagement and intrinsic motivation and the beauty of music first. And that's tough to commit to when you think that you have to deal with the behaviors first before you can teach something of value. But teaching that thing of value is really where it starts. And as soon as I really understood that idea, I know it's kind of a Bob Duke idea. And as soon as I really understood that idea, it's really a special thing. Students don't want to be rewarded for doing things that aren't part of your classroom curriculum. It's not part of what you feel passionate about. So I think those two things, kind of having a mentor teacher around your first couple of years, and just buying into the value of what you're teaching fully and completely, and making your classroom about that. That's kind of where I got my start. And that really helped me out a lot at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. That brings us to kind of one big point that I think would be a great place to start, which is that classroom management and behavior management is not at all separate from the overall goals of your classroom and the music making and the overall performance goals of playing that you have for your students. Maybe one of you guys can talk a little bit about your time in the classroom and how that manifests. So how a student might be more likely to exhibit positive, wanted behaviors because you're engaging in expressive music making. Jeremy, you want to start with that?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to context. Students see what musicians do and they want to do it. They when you're teaching them in a way that where you're putting barriers in front of them before they can have that experience of what a musician does, then that's when the frustration kicks in, and then that's when the distrust in your expertise comes in, and then that's really when a lot of the problems start to snowball. So, like, even if it's something just as simple as what you do with a warm up, playing just like great sounds on the guitar, even if it's like one note, if you're a guitar teacher, then that means maybe you play some sort of accompaniment underneath, but you make it like a musical moment. It's not just, oh, this is the purpose of us all playing at the same time. And you stick with that. And ideally, the every concept that you explore in your class is through that lens of context. And then that doesn't always happen. But ideally, the majority of the class will go along with that as long as you are genuinely excited about the music that they're making, and that they actually understand that they're making really great music.
Yeah, I want to jump in real quick and talk about one point that you bring up, which is establishing that trust. And there's kind of, I mean, there is a contract between student and teacher, right? They came to that class most of the time because they chose to be there. They want to play guitar. Yeah. And then there's an expectation that goes along with that. So when you say, you know, establishing that trust and showing them that what we're doing is of value and meets the expectations that they have, that happens immediately. That happens the first day. I think that's one of the, you know, one of the things that we see classes that have really sort of what some might say spiraled, you know, to a point where they're very, very difficult to control, and very little music is being made. Though, for the most part, those classes didn't start in this place of building trust, making music from the very beginning. And Phil mentioned earlier just about Jeremy telling him he's too frantic, you know, like the teacher that he's, you know, or the way that he's behaving in front of the students is not conducive to their own, you know, positive behavior. So that brings up the idea of, you know, teacher as a person and how we act and how that can help our students to calm themselves and come from a place of focus and attention and motivation. Phil, do you have any thoughts about that as far as, you know, your own character and person in front of your ensemble and how that contributes to the behavior of your students?
Yeah, you know, like I said, and I'm sure looking back that energy that is caused by problematic behavior is part of a more vicious cycle that really like just encourages it to happen again. And I see it. You know, I'm a mentor teacher on my campus, and I walk into classrooms and I see that cycle start. And you know, some would call it a power struggle, but really it's just bad energy feeding off of bad energy. And to be the calm and assertive presence in a room is powerful. And really a lot of times the less you say, the more powerful everything that you say is. Like when I'm doing like basic error correction on like technique or position, I eyeball a student, I make eye contact, and I don't say anything because they normally know what I'm expecting of their position. And that silence is so uncomfortable sometimes, but the student has to think it through and they have to correct that on themselves. And it's such a powerful idea that when the volume in the classroom gets loud, the teacher's first reaction is to get loud with it and to talk over it or to teach over it or things like that. But if you can find a way to create those silences and to create that, you know, every word that you say in that scenario is more powerful, and every gesture that you make, conducting or eyeballs or everything, is more powerful. Because when you're talking loud, they don't have to look at you. Right. But when you're making nonverbal gestures, they have to keep their eyes on you at all times. So yeah, I mean, that calm, assertive presence allows me to do those things, which I never would have thought of doing my first 2 or 3 years in the classroom.
Yeah, I think you know what Travis brought up though is that, you know, we have these moments of engagement, and they have to happen from day one. But that doesn't mean that you're you know, like the dictator of the classroom. There are expectations that you've already set that you know that you want to enforce, And because you're probably going to have a kid test you on the first day about it, and you have to stick to those expectations to a T. Never really letting it slide, because what can also happen is you enforce it one day and then don't enforce it another day, and then there's a kid that's, you know, making you mad that day, who's just really acting up, and then you kind of like come down hard on that kid, way harder than you would have the other day, and the other kid would be like, hey, but you know, you didn't so and so did the same thing yesterday and you didn't do this to him or her. That's where these situations get really, really bad sometimes. But also, you know, if you spend the first like 2 weeks of class thinking that you need to teach these kids how to like clap quarter and eighth notes, and just being able to be proficient on multiple different rhythms and talking about the parts of the guitar, that those first 2 weeks, really, those first like 2 or 3 days are like where the magic happens. Like, it's important that we get the guitars in the hands the very first day and we go, but we're also enforcing all of those expectations from day one.
Absolutely. You know, I think classroom management, you know, when it's very basically there are you know, bad classrooms are all bad, or difficult classrooms, maybe a better word. They're difficult for so many different reasons, right? So many times we talk to teachers about, well, I have this one kid, or I have this one administrator, or I have this behavior management plan that my school mandates, or my classroom is not set up in a way that I can, you know, so there's all these, you know, thousands and thousands of different ways that a class can be difficult. But there are much fewer ways that really fabulous teachers manage their classrooms, and there are similarities amongst those teachers. So I think it might be kind of fruitful for us to talk about what are those positive things that we see in classrooms. And one of them, Jeremy just mentioned, which is establishing contingencies, rules. And what happens if you break those rules is just established right out of the gate. And there is no flexibility on those rules. So that's not to say that the punishment is the same for every student, but something happens if you talk while I'm trying to talk to the class, or if you're playing your guitar while I'm trying to listen to another student play, then something happens, and those contingencies are steadfast. And what I know that we see in so many of the classes that we work in is that because we're such helpful, kind, wonderful people to begin with, all teachers, you know, want to be nice to their students. You know, we let that one little thing go, you know, that one little sound over in the corner, or that one little bit of chatter over in the other corner, and we let it go because we're nice people, and we think maybe that would be mean to call it out that first day. And ultimately what that happens is it actually makes that behavior more likely to not only continue, but to grow and graduate to a more disruptive behavior. So when we think about what the best teachers are doing, establishing those contingencies with zero exception, and enforcing them with zero exception from the beginning. All of this is just this tiny little, you know, part of these first few class periods that are all about the music and all about positive engagement, and emphatic positive feedback to your students, because they're doing all these things so well. So that's one thing. I don't know, Phil, do you have you know, another example of maybe this is what you know, great teachers do who have really created a situation, positive situation in their classroom?
I think there's an accountability that you're talking about. Basically, from day one, they're accountable to you, you know, in the classroom as a whole. I try to make those connections between the students themselves also. And reinforcing positive behaviors is big. You know, like in a rainbow kind of unicorn classroom world, I can turn to my left, work with the guitar 1 section, and guitar 3 is just going to kind of sit quietly while I work with that section, right? But you have to set that stuff up. You have to make that happen. And when it does happen, you have to positively reward those behaviors that were conducive to guitar 1 being a better section at that goal-oriented thing that you had in mind for them. So like it happened today. And I was working with a section and I did not hear a peep from behind me for that whole 5 minutes that I was working on this little section. And I turned around and I thanked them for allowing that growth to happen. And you know, yes, you have to take care of the unwanted behaviors. You have to address every single one, because every single one that you allow to happen is basically undercutting your authority. But when you see something that you like, you got to tell them that you like it. It's them good. It ignites their pride that they helped out in some way just by being quiet.
Absolutely. What a wonderful sentiment, and something that I think so many teachers, myself from time to time included, we forget about the positive.
Yeah.
And what an effect that has. It's just like, when I talk to teachers and they're having trouble with the student and they say, well, I called home, to the parents, 4 times to tell them that John is disrupting class and among other things. And it's that idea of calling the parent for positive reasons, just to tell them that, John's doing great. He played beautifully today. And that brings me to another point, which I think is crucial to my philosophy of classroom management, which is I have to know every one of my students individually. Yes. So what makes them tick? What are the reasons that they're disrupting? Because if we know what's reinforcing behaviors, what's punishing behaviors, if we know our students intimately and what makes them tick, then we can really set up a situation for them to be successful. And I know I have hundreds of examples of those interactions with individual kids. I wonder, Jeremy, if you've got some perspective.
Well, I think, yeah, definitely. In thinking about that, because all the things we're talking about, it can come across to somebody listening that everything's like puppy dogs and rainbows the whole time. It's not. Like there's always going to be issues, because you're basically shaping individuals and they're learning how to become good people themselves. And very often, especially at some of the harder schools that are just serve a harder population, you'll encounter kids that just are real problems in your classroom, and consistent problems. And a lot of times that means that you have to start working from a different skill set. Like reprimanding them and doing all these things isn't actually going to solve the problem.
Well, they're used to that. I mean,
yeah.
They in those situations, we work in Title I schools across Austin and consult with Title I schools in Houston, and in many cases, these are students who have been so consistently reprimanded for their entire school career that it's just not helping anyone.
Yeah.
And so you have to change your approach.
But the advice that I always give other teachers for that is that, if they're having a big problem in your class, then chances are they're probably having the same problems in another class. And it's worth taking the time to go look at that kid's schedule and see what other teachers he or she has, and go talk to those teachers. And if one of them is having success with that kid, figure out what they're doing. Talk to them about a lot of that stuff. Because you really have to start to kind of rally the village around a kid like that. Because, to continue to give a referral or things like that, that just kind of perpetuates a pathway that they're already used to being on. And it's an opportunity to make a real change. Now that being said, you can't be doing all of that at the expense of your other students in the class. So that's kind of the tricky point, is figuring out how to balance all of that. What it all amounts to is a lot of work for the teacher outside of the classroom. calling parents, talking to administrators, talking to other teachers, having that kid come in either before or after school, but you really have to commit to working with that kid to change that behavior. So you have to really follow through and be consistent.
Phil, do you have any thoughts about that idea of knowing your students on an individual basis and knowing what makes them tick?
Yeah, and I just want to comment kind of on the order of things that we've already discussed. First things, when you have unwanted behaviors in your classroom, like Travis said, you have to deal with them all the same. If it's coming from the top student in the class, if it's coming from the type of student that we're discussing, that structure is needed most by the student that doesn't have a lot of it somewhere else. So that structure to me comes first. And I think schools are making mistakes because they're doing the opposite. They're doing what we're talking about doing, which is very important, but they're doing that first. When a behavior happens, they're asking, why did the behavior happen?
Yeah.
But first, deal with the behavior and make sure that there's a consequence for that behavior for that student, so that student knows that it's been addressed, and more importantly, that the classroom knows that it's been addressed and that student is being held to the same standard as the rest of them. Now, after that is kind of square, after that student is existing with consequence in your classroom for their behaviors, then yes, it's so important to understand anything that could help you help them. You know, so often a behavior comes from a student that's confused, that doesn't understand, that's not engaged, that's not in the flow of the instruction. And that could come from, you know, a 504 student with dyslexia. They're having trouble reading the music. They are mixing up notes in their music and it is frustrating them. So a teacher has that information. You need to use that information, you know, use that information to at very least let the student know, I understand the challenges that you're having. Please communicate with me how I can help you better.
Mm-hmm.
But any bit of information that's provided to you from the counselors or from the administration on the student, any program that they're a part of, you know, we get information on like how high their at-risk score is. Basically, like there's an algorithm for that. Like you can look up a student in the district and find out kind of how at risk that student is based on previous behavior, based on previous suspensions and referrals, and and use all of that information to help you understand the student best, how to help them. And then the relationship part of it is gigantic too. You know, those students, they don't want to be they don't want to be berated all the time. Like you said, they're done with that by this point. In middle school, they have an elementary school full of that. They don't want that to happen anymore. Sometimes those students want to be a positive part of your program. They want to help out. They want to be given responsibilities. They want to be positively and reinforced for things that they are doing well, because that's so much more interesting for them than whatever else they're dealing with. So again, even with this type of student that we're talking about, it's a very complex issue, but use every piece of information at your disposal that you're being provided, and actually legally bound to follow. I mean, you know, for some of this information, you are legally obligated to understand it and to follow it to the best of your ability as a teacher, even in a elective classroom. So yeah, relationships are important. Understanding what the students' challenges are important. But my advice to teachers is to make sure that your classroom structures are held tight, no matter what else is going on.
I think one thing, just before we like move on to the next concept or whatever, just one, also understanding what your expectations are in the classroom, but also being like having no doubt as to what your administration wants you to be doing too. Often, especially like new teachers, they don't completely understand, you know, where the contingencies are that they're supposed to follow through with, and they don't understand the protocol. And sometimes if you don't know what you have at your disposal, then you don't know what you can deploy, obviously, when you run into those situations. And then that can lead you to, you know, half enforcing things here or there. So I think like especially younger teachers, that like you need to have a very clear dialogue with your administrators, being like, okay, what is it that you would like me to do when things like this happen? Because some schools, they don't want you to, a referral isn't that powerful on the campus at all. Sometimes it is. Sometimes that a referral means that that's gonna ignite some resources on the campus to kind of help work with the kids. And sometimes that just means a piece of paper goes in and nothing actually happens, and it just leads to the later problems for the student.
Absolutely, yeah. So I want to sort of shift gears, and this is just a little exercise. It's something that I like to do, which is create hypothetical situations, and they're not actually hypothetical.
You're first,
because, and just talk about sort of analyze and see what would we do in this situation, and in going through that process, I think it's enlightening to see how other people think about their students. So I'm gonna describe a student. Let's call her Jenny. Okay, Jenny's in a middle school guitar classroom. It's the first few weeks of instruction of a beginning class, and Jenny is very loud, talking over other students, laughing, making jokes, talking over you. Maybe she's turning over to her neighbor and turning a tuning key from time to time. The other students are clearly distracted. Some of them are laughing at her, and some are kind of leery and like, what's going on here? And she's also very self-deprecating. Like, I can't, like, nobody wants me to play this thing, it's making kind of jokes like that. But it's clearly disruptive. It's clearly something we have to handle immediately. What are you thinking about, and what are you doing?
Am I first? Okay, I'll take a shot at this. So the first thing that I would do when I noticed this behavior is I would look at the group of students and I would try to understand who could be a positive influence on her behavior and who would not kind of feed in to that, I don't know, cries for attention. And I would look at the seating arrangement first. She would probably not be in the middle of the classroom, center of attention. She would probably be off to the side, outside of one of the outside sections, somewhere where close to me, but also minimizing the impact on the students if she is kind of drawing attention to herself. I think that's the first thing that I would do, and try to surround herself with people that I think would influence her in a positive way. And then just, wait for Miss Jenny to do something right and start, showing her the path to what my expectation is through positive reinforcement. Because if she is that much of an outlier, and if she's that much louder and that much more rambunctious than the rest of the class, it probably is a pattern behavior, and it probably has been going on for a long time. And it probably has been passed on by a lot of teachers that kind of didn't, handle it in the right way. So I guess redirecting through, positive reinforcement, having a group of students around her that can help her out also if she's confused about things and stuff like that. I think that'd be my first crack at it.
So would you address the behavior, you talked about sort of creating that structure and adhering to the contingencies that are in place, and Jenny knows the rules. She's just not following them. So Phil, would you acknowledge that right out of the gate, or would you really just sort of redirect into positive positive interaction first?
So here's the challenge, right? Because, when Jeremy and I were first starting to work together, when he was working with me, it was 3 warnings. You play or talk once, 1 warning, no problem. Strings in your lap, and I'll ask you to play when I think you've understood what I expect from you. 3 warnings, your guitar goes up, and you don't participate for the rest of the rehearsal. That's only a consequence for somebody who's in the flow of the classroom and really enjoys what they're doing in that classroom. But if we're talking about the first couple of weeks and she's already hitting these roadblocks, and she hasn't even established kind of a love and a joy for what she's doing, then that's not really a consequence for her. You know, putting her instrument up or not participating in rehearsal may be what she wants in the first place. And you got to be aware of that in the classroom. If a student, you know, is attempting to get what they want through negative behaviors, then you got to change your course there also. So I don't have, I do address all the behaviors that are unwanted in some way, but I probably don't have the most consistent plans for every single one of those behaviors for that reason exactly. And I'm pretty honest with my students. And I ask them early on in the year, are you all like each other? You know, are you all exactly the same? And they kind of look around and they go, no, of course not. Well, I'm not going to treat you all the same. And, you know, if you mess up, if you make a mistake, something will happen, and I don't know what's going to happen. And I might be creative to find that in the moment. And I've found some really funny and creative ways to address behavior.
Well, that's a huge point, Phil. And I want to just stop because that's a very, very big point. While, you know, contingency or the rules are the same for everyone. However, the punishments are different for every student or for a lot of students. And they are situational. It depends on even that moment, how that student feels. And so, you know, right now, Phil is assuming that Jenny, this hypothetical student that we've created, would want to be removed from the class, and might actually, that might be why she's acting out. So Phil's thinking, you know, I'm not gonna allow her that opportunity because that's not going to function. This behavior will continue and she's not participating in class. So I'm going to stop and give her a really positive experience, a small one right out of the gate, where I can we can be celebratory and sort of invite her into this functional classroom experience. So that's one absolutely one possibility for how to handle that situation. What do you think, Jim?
I think, especially if it's this is just something that has popped up, like it's not something that's been perpetuating. You know, I'm glad, and Phil, I'm glad you brought up the three like check marks or whatever, because that can work in a pinch, but at the end of the day, when you give a check mark to a kid, that means that's one extra level that they can misbehave or whatever, because they know they can get at least to 2 check marks, and then, you know, everything's cool, and they will test that. They will go there. But oftentimes too, especially in the middle school level, this leads back to what I said about, like, understand what the administration wants you to do. A lot of schools have a specific protocol that you have to go through, and it's important because, one, it also kind of protects you, as long as you're documenting the things that you're saying. Because in a perfect world, these things will work, but they kind of amount to check marks, in my opinion. So, for instance, like if I was at a middle school that I was at today, that is a tough place to work at. They have a very specific way that you have to deal with behavior. So, like, step 1 is a warning. Step 2 is like a teacher-student conference. Step 3 is a timeout. Step 4 is a lunch detention and a call home. So what that can look like, the way you can make that work is, you know, as if the student is misbehaving, or Jenny is speaking out, you know, have everybody go to standby and just kind of reset the class just a little bit. And if it continues, then you give, you know, you have to tell the student that's a warning, or however wording you want to do that. But then the next step, that conference, if it continues to happen, then the entire class is, you know, have them work on something on their own, and that's you walking over and just speaking to that student, just explaining the expectations and the things that aren't happening right now and what that means. And majority of the time, that blows up in your face. Okay, but my thing that I like to do with a student like that is if it is time to have that student teacher conference moment, is say, today I just want you to be at standby and in playing position, looking good for the day, and try to play uh, with the class, but at the very least, just sit in good position with us, and that's your grade for the day. And if that doesn't happen, if I have to call on you, then that's your grade. And if that still doesn't happen, then uh, then you have to go further down the list that the school likes you to do. But if you ask that student and they're doing that partway, maybe in 3 minutes after that moment happened, and she's sitting in good position, you just say, Jenny, you look awesome, looks great. And usually that will kind of diffuse that moment a little bit. But I would say, even going that far, that would, for me, I would still, at the end of class that day, I would make a point to contact that parent as soon as possible, just to because there may be some other things, and that also shows when that kid gets home, they'll say, oh, your guitar teacher called today and told me, how things were in class today. And, we need to talk about how to make that a little better. And that just shows that you're going to follow through, and you're also genuinely interested in that student.
Absolutely. So what I'm hearing is a lot of personal interaction and contact, and also sort of an adherence to the broader management structures that are in place with the school, but a little bit in your own way. And I think, so I'll kind of give my 2 cents about this one situation. If I'm thinking about Jenny, she's, talking out, disrupting, messing with guitar tuners, and really cracking jokes, and the students are laughing, and she's also kind of giving some self-deprecating language, like certainly not sure she can do this thing, or scared to make a mistake because it's early. My approach would be to certainly acknowledge the behavior right out of the gate. So for me, oftentimes that's I would say, Jenny, why don't you just set your guitar down just a minute, so we can gather ourselves and be quiet and move rehearsal forward. There's no, gut, anger, or anything involved in that negative feedback or that punishment. It's just, we can't do this if you're breaking this rule, or if you're talking over us. So if you would just put your guitar down, and it's a happy thing. And then really just moments later, I'd ask her to pick it back up. And that's where Phil was talking about orchestrating that moment of success, and pairing that positive experience with doing the exact thing she was not doing a moment ago. So I ask her to play by herself, maybe something small that I know she can do, and I know she can do it well. And we can, as a class, have this moment to celebrate Jenny, creating this one beautiful sound. And then, we're starting to pair that, doing what the teacher needs me to do, to what she wants, which is clearly for her peers to acknowledge her, and to be sort of in the spotlight for a moment. And so I want to use those things that I know about Jenny to my advantage. Just like Phil was saying, use all the information that you have. That's a lot of information just from that one little snapshot. And I will say, if the behavior continues and it's extremely disruptive and I can't get a hold on it, I do ask students to move away from the ensemble at times. So if there's just no focus, I will ask them to leave the group and be elsewhere. And sometimes that's really a functional thing for that individual student. They want to be a part of it, so being away is really punishing. The other, student who does want to be away, sometimes it's just in that moment, I have to get work done. It's not going to happen, and the student knows it. Yeah. So we move forward. But what I'm going to do is, just like Jeremy said, talk to that student maybe after class in passing. I'm going to, maybe next time when that student walks through the door, I'm going to say, hey, Jenny, today I really think that you can play this part really, really well, and I want you to show all the other students. So when we're warming up, I want you to be real quiet and diligent and work hard. And then I'm going to bring you up to the front of the class because I think everybody can learn from you. And that's going to be this motivating thing that keeps her focused for those 2 moments. And then again, we get to celebrate, which is what it's all about. And Phil really, you know, drove that point home right in the beginning. It's a culture of joy. And when we think about management, it's every interaction that we have with an individual student. So that's my 2 cents. Like I said, every single situation is so unique and so different. But when we're thoughtful about the individual student and our interactions with them, then we can really make some progress.
I'd say one crucial component, though, too, is that everything that we've described, it's hard to make it successful if you don't already have a clear plan for the class that day. Like if you're not already, so that's the flip side of this. Like you can't manage a class if you haven't managed yourself. So you have like the flip side of it is that the kids are going to behave, but then you're also going to be very clear in what it is that you're doing with them that day. So you have a clear plan of what success is going to look like that day. What that's going to do is you're already prepared and you have a goal for that class period. But it also kind of helps you eliminate that moment where when a kid acts up, you get mad. It'll help you take the emotion out of it because it helps you, because you're unifying the class around the common goal that you're trying to get to that day.
Well, that speaks to the point that Phil was talking about earlier as well, which is for so many new teachers, there's just too much information to process at one time. There's so much coming at you. And one of the reasons that I think many teachers, as they grow and get more experience, classroom management gets better is because the content of what they're teaching becomes easier for them to process, and the instruction itself becomes really second nature, and it's a craft, right? So our rehearsal technique is not separated from our management. We get better as teachers because we literally work to get better every day at this thing that we're doing. So the management gets better because I think we just have more space to devote to these things, and being prepared every day when you come into the room as far as what you're going to teach and how you're going to teach it. And I don't mean a sequence like step 1, 2, 3, and 4, because it's important to know that sequence, but to know the music and what you want to hear and exactly how you want to hear it. If you've got that, then the other things you can actually manage on a moment-to-moment basis. And Phil, we hadn't heard from you in a while.
Yeah. If I could just add to this, like, so this Jenny scenario, I mean, is an interesting one, right? But when you work at a Title I school, you have Jenny plus 4 or 5 other scenarios that are very similar to Jenny's situation in the same classroom. And I think sometimes as teachers, like, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to solve all those problems at one time, but you absolutely cannot. So like even setting goals for how to deal with that. Like I had a beginning guitar class at the beginning of the year. It was gigantic, and it had, like, I would say 5 or 6 like really high need students in it, like students that were going to need a lot of attention from me to get them into the flow of the class, right? I didn't, like, the old version of myself, I would have pressured myself to try to solve all those problems within one class period or within 1 week. But really, I just solved them one at a time. You know, the student that needed translation, I made sure that they were sitting next to somebody that could translate for them. Jenny was sitting somewhere where I could kind of manage her behavior and give her the reinforcement that she needed. You know, the dyslexic student had music that was copied onto high contrast paper. So at the very least, they felt special, you know, but it wasn't happening all at the same time. I wasn't putting that pressure on myself to do that all at the same time. And I think there's another element here is that we have to find solutions that put less pressure and less time constraints on us. Like, I see a lot of teachers with very convoluted plans for managing these things that involve a lot of extra hours, that involve a lot of extra heart, and a lot of extra work that can drain a teacher. So I think part of this is biting off small chunks and just setting small goals for yourself with these management issues, whether it's individual students or whether it's like long-term visions for how you want your class to be run. You know, small goals, small attainable, just like we do with our students in the classroom.
That's a beautiful statement, Phil. And it brings me to, you know, a situation that Jeremy and I see so often, where we're asked to come into classrooms that feel completely out of control. And the teachers are exasperated and throwing up their hands. I've got all of these things going on. And without exception, our first step is to decide what's one thing that we can fix in the next class period. What's one thing we can focus on and try with one student, and we can come up with a little solution. Because looking at these things, especially in classes that have a lot of challenges, looking at these things holistically and trying to approach everyone at the same time and expecting large scale improvement with every student in your class is not how we fix these issues. So yeah, I love, I love the statement you just made, Phil, because it implies patience with ourselves as teachers, that there's only so much that we can do, and identifying just that one small thing that we can think about tomorrow or for the next week. Oftentimes when I'm preparing to teach a class, I'll just have one note for one student, one thing that I need to really work on with one individual student. And because we have the luxury of seeing these kids hundreds of times over the course of a year or even multiple years, it doesn't all have to be done right now. So yeah, I'll make these small adjustments, and over time, it really does start to permeate. When we talk about classroom culture, it's really just small changes that happen over a long period of time to where everyone's in a place where there's just more joy in the music making.
Yeah.
If I could say one more thing, I think, when all of this stuff piles up and you feel overwhelmed, like, there's a type of student in your classroom that gets neglected, and it's the student that is always doing what you're asking them to do, giving best effort and trying to do it at the absolute highest level. And we can't ignore that student either. Just because they're not an immediate negative impact on the classroom, that student deserves your attention too. And the last time Jeremy was at Beta-Check this year, he said sometimes it's all right to just pick on a student, ask them to play, and just tell them, hey, you played that beautifully, great, and then move on. The student that just needed that little bit of attention, or maybe they didn't need it, but they deserve it. There's a lot of things that I just feel like when you get wrapped up in all these issues and you start putting your time into these issues, it's heartbreaking to think that you're neglecting the students that aren't causing you any problems.
Absolutely. Beautiful point. So I think we do have a question from Brian. So he says, I'd love to hear about any observations any of you may have done in elementary guitar classrooms. It's a 35-hour school week. I see kids 45 minutes. So that's 34 hours that they're not with me. Absolutely. It's a fabulous question. We do work in elementary schools pretty regularly. I think this year I probably have more experience on our team going into elementary school classrooms. And so what I can tell you is one specific school, and I'll call out the teacher because he's really fabulous. It's Ridgetop Elementary, and Mr. A is the new music teacher over there this year, and he's doing guitar for all 4th and 5th graders. And what I see Mr. A doing beautifully is adjusting his goals to suit the amount of time. They're appropriate goals, essentially. So he's not really trying to play multiple pieces and teach, a lot of, standard notation on the guitar while doing improv and getting them alternating IM. The goals are really managed, and that's the first thing. The second thing is the procedures are just so beautiful to watch. So from the moment the kids walk into what is, it's really a classroom on a stage in an auditorium type setting, they know exactly what to do. And they start singing the moment they walk into the classroom. They know the song. They do this, really, coordinated movements around, and they sit in their square that they know where to go. And there's really no opportunities for a student to break off and do something that is distracting, because they have, exact moment to moment, they know what to do. And then Mr. A expresses these expectations every single day when they come in, exactly what they're going to be doing that day. And then he's constantly asking individuals to do little things. Like every kid in that class has done something positive within the first 10 minutes of the class. And then with the guitar piece, they get the guitars. There's so many opportunities to be distracted. Mr. A gives responsibility to each kid, each class period. So it's going to get the guitars for the other students, because it would be, just a really wild scene if every kid went up and grabbed a guitar. And then every class period, the one student who did get the guitars picks the student who will do it the next day. So there's all this involvement, peer-to-peer. And then, but I think the most astounding thing is that they are singing, making music, dancing, or playing guitar every single moment of that 45 minutes. And they are accomplishing something every one of those class periods. And then, and ultimately, the goals that they set long-term are really within their reach. And I think that that's a really good thing to think about as an elementary school teacher.
Yeah, and I actually don't have near the experience in the elementary classroom as Travis does and some of my colleagues. But I would say, like, if it's you're on a 35-hour week and you see your kids 45 minutes, I'm assuming that means you're seeing that specific class for 45 minutes every week. There's a lot of things about the guitar that works because you see the kids, every other day or every day.
He's probably seeing every class 45 minutes per week.
So okay, yeah, every class in the school.
Yeah, so yeah. Large amounts of
so
students.
So basically, you see this one, you see one specific group once a week, and that means that, like, the expectations are a little different. Success is different. What they're going to be able to accomplish in that short amount of time on the guitar, because the guitar kind of has its own, like, energy. Any like instrument in an elementary classroom is going to generate its own energy because the kids are just so excited to have something in their hand that makes noise. But there's a lot of solutions that you could as opposed to maybe thinking about trying to come up with a very complex, ensemble piece. Maybe it's half the kids playing open string chords while the other half of the kids are singing a song with those chords.
Well, I want to say something about that real quick, because so many, oftentimes when there's a problem in a classroom, we can think of some other thing that makes that behavior impossible. So if talking is a behavior that we really don't want, and students are talking over us while we're teaching, you can't talk and sing at the same time.
Yeah.
Singing is an example of of really thinking, what's a behavior that is incongruous, is that right?
Sure.
With talking. Well, singing is. So by its very nature, it extinguishes that behavior. So
yeah, I don't know, Brian, if you are if you're a subscriber, but there's a lot of like interesting, some good starting places as how to utilize the guitar inside of our elementary primer on the guitarcurriculum.com website. So
that brings me actually to some resources that I want to talk about. I think it's 7:30 now. First, I do want to thank Eric also for running this whole show. We are not good with technology, Jeremy and I, and Eric makes all of these things happen.
Absolutely,
we really thank you. But there's a few resources. On guitarcurriculum.com, in all of the course packets and in our teacher manual, there's a document called Rehearsal Technique Management Through Music. And these are just really some kind of bullet pointed ideas about managing through your day-to-day interactions with the students. So you can take a look at those. There's also a document on gc.com called 20 teacher behaviors, I believe, or 20 effective behaviors. It's a little research study that I did a few years back that is really about really great rehearsal technique and what the best teachers do to affect positive change in their students. And so that's another one to take a look at. And then finally, Phil earlier mentioned Dr. Bob Duke. Bob Duke is sort of our mentor and our music education guru. He's the head of the Music and Human Learning Department at the University of Texas at Austin, and a great friend. He wrote a book called Intelligent Music Teaching, and it really runs the gamut. It is absolutely required reading for anyone who teaches music. And the thing I love about Bob's writing and his approach is that it's so palatable. It's so easy to understand. It's almost like you're reading each of these chapters and you read the last sentence and you say, of course, right? Duh, I should have been doing this the whole time. But that's another great resource for you to read. And then, and I know I speak for Jeremy and I, we would love to be a resource for you via email or Skype videos or recorded videos, however you can think to interact. We get classroom videos from all over the country, and a lot of teachers asking us, how can I fix these classroom behavior problems? And we love to help with that sort of thing. There's a forum on guitarcurriculum.com that is a great place to sort of voice some of these concerns, and we can all come up with some ideas. And then I know Phil is a wonderfully generous guy who would love to help you as well. I can't tell you how much your perspective, Phil, has added to this conversation. Just some really fabulous ideas, and we thank you.
Thank you guys. Sorry, allergies. Thank you guys for all that you do too. I couldn't do what I do without you guys.
Well, thank you. And I guess that's going to wrap it up for us. I believe that this video will be posted on YouTube in the coming days, and we can go back and watch it. But feel free to get in touch anytime. Thank you for everything you do as a teacher.
And thank you guys, everyone that's joined us, and thank you everyone that will look at this later.